It all began imperceptibly. In the magnificent negotiation hall of a historic chateau in Geneva, a slight tremor in the foreign minister's hand as he signed the document. A bead of sweat on the French diplomat's brow, unexplainable by the warmth of the fireplace. The head of security, watching the cameras, attributed these small details to fatigue. The doctor in the room thought the stress levels of the important guests were high. No one saw anything. But in the corner of the room, the old man hired to calm the air saw everything. And more importantly, he smelled it. He was not just a perfumer. He recognized patterns. And right now, beneath the delicate notes of sandalwood and white tea, he recognized the pattern spreading through the air. This was not the pattern of an illness, but of a weapon. He could visualize the toxin's progression through the nervous system in his mind. Because, in a secret facility deep in the Ural Mountains, he was the one who had created that pattern. His name was Anton. People knew him as an eccentric Parisian genius who found the world's rarest essences and created works of art from them. His task today was simple: to fill the room with a scent that inspired trust and peace for the historic peace treaty to be signed between two old enemy nations. He had carefully analyzed the room's atmosphere. The heavy velvet curtains, the surface of the polished mahogany table reflecting the chandeliers, the smell of old paper and new ambitions. To balance all these scents, he had prepared a complex mixture of 6 different essences. The scent would evolve over time, with the calming notes of cedar becoming more prominent during the most tense moments of the negotiations. He had calculated everything. As the negotiations progressed, Anton managed the room's atmosphere like a conductor. But then he noticed something that didn't belong. A ghost note. A synthetic, metallic, almost imperceptibly faint scent. Like a single ozone molecule mixed into clean air. An anomaly that modern sensors would never notice. Anton's mind was like a vast library containing tens of thousands of molecular memories. He ran that ghost note through the shelves of his mind, and when he found a match, his heart, for the first time in decades, was gripped by that familiar cold fear. He closed his eyes and his mind traveled back in time to a snow-covered, brutal landscape. The narrator continues as Anton's past comes to life. Back then, he was not Anton. He was Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov, one of the Soviet Union's most brilliant chemical weapons engineers. In an underground laboratory they called Facility 17, he was tasked with creating the perfect assassination weapon. In the cold, sterile laboratory, every move they made was watched by a political officer. Dmitry had embraced this task with the passion of a scientist. The challenge was to create a perfectly insidious molecule, odorless, tasteless, colorless, and most importantly, a neurotoxin that mimicked a natural heart attack in autopsy reports. After months of work, he created it. Codename, Tikhaya Smert, silent death. When released into a ventilation system, the victims would only feel a slight dizziness and fatigue. Within 10 minutes, the central nervous system would slowly shut down, and the heart would stop. It left no trace behind. That day, as his colleagues in the lab congratulated him, Dmitry was in a state of silent horror at the terrible potential of his invention. One day, Dmitry saw the results of his weapon's first field test. The target was a dissident writer, but the poison had killed not only the writer, but also his wife and young daughter in the same room. The report included photos of the family's lifeless bodies. In the little girl's hand was a fallen rag doll. In that moment, Dmitry realized he had not created a scientific achievement, but a monstrosity. That night, he took the formula for Tikhaya Smert, and the only copy of its antidote and, at the risk of his life, defected to the West. He got a new identity, a new life, and a new name, Anton. He buried his past behind the beauty of perfumes. Until today. Now, in that luxurious hall in Geneva, Anton was facing his own ghost. Someone had found his formula, recreated it, and was now using it here to sabotage a peace treaty and eliminate world leaders. The symptoms were worsening. The British ambassador loosened his collar. The German chancellor closed his eyes for a moment. The head of security, thinking the air in the room was a bit stuffy, secretly gave a signal to increase the ventilation. This was the worst mistake. Increasing the ventilation would cause the poison to spread faster. Anton was out of time. He couldn't go to security and shout, "We've all been poisoned." No one would believe him. It would cause a panic, and everyone would hasten their deaths by breathing faster as they tried to flee. And the antidote was thousands of kilometers away, locked in his safe in Paris. He had to find another way. His mind began to work with the speed of an old chemist. The molecular structure of Smert was based on a specific amino acid chain. This chain was quite fragile. It would break down in a highly acidic or alkaline environment. This was a glimmer of hope. Without attracting anyone's attention, Anton slowly got up. He left his delicate essence bottles aside and ran, but not to the exit, but towards the chateau's old large kitchen. He wasn't looking for a place to hide. He was looking for vinegar, salt, and lemons, the ingredients for an antidote that only he knew how to make. The chefs in the kitchen looked in surprise at this elegant old man who burst into the room. Anton shouted at them, "Bring me your strongest vinegar, all your lemons, and a box of baking soda." Quick. In a flurry. Although they didn't understand what was happening, they brought what he asked for. Anton emptied the vinegar and lemon juice into a large metal mixing bowl. In his mind, he was calculating the chemical reaction. The acetic acid would break the toxin's peptide bonds. The citric acid would act as an aerosol, accelerating the evaporation. And the baking soda, when heated, would create a carbon dioxide cloud that would carry the antidote upwards into the ventilation intake. But for this, he needed a heat source. He grabbed a large copper pot from the stove, poured some alcoholic liquor into it, and set it on fire. As the flames rose, he poured the acidic mixture into the pot. The temperature instantly began to vaporize the liquid. A sharp, acidic vapor filled the kitchen. In the negotiation hall, the situation was getting worse. Several diplomats had started coughing and having difficulty breathing. The head of security finally realized that something was very wrong and ordered the room to be quarantined. At that exact moment, a light, sharp smell of vinegar and lemon began to spread through the ventilation vents into the room. At first, no one understood, but within a few seconds the coughs subsided. The dizziness passed. The trembling hands stopped. The invisible killer in the air was being destroyed by another invisible force. When the security teams burst into the kitchen, they found Anton holding a burning pot towards the ventilation intake. They thought he was a terrorist and threw him to the ground. A few hours later, everything was understood. Blood tests revealed neutralized traces of Smert in the diplomat's blood. In the interrogation room, Anton told everything to a Swiss intelligence agent named Dubois. He told him about Dmitry Volkov, Facility 17, and the monster he had created himself. After listening to this incredible story, the agent offered Anton a deal. In exchange for this incident being covered up as a sudden ventilation failure, Anton's past would remain a secret, and he would continue his freedom. The new chapter. Anton was not declared a hero. On the contrary, his existence was kept as a state secret. A week later, he was back in his small shop in Paris, working on a new perfume. But his peace was short-lived. When the doorbell rang, Anton was distilling a rare orchid essence. The visitor was Agent Dubois. His face was grave. "We only won a battle, Dmitri," he said, using Anton's old name. "But we're about to lose the war." Dubois placed several files on the table, photos, reports. After the incident in Geneva, we found traces of Tikaya Smirt in 2 other locations, one at a NATO meeting in Brussels, the other at a G7 summit in Tokyo. No one died, but someone is sending a message. Someone has let your ghost out of the bottle, and the only person who can help us put it back in the bottle is its creator. Dubois asked Anton to analyze the samples they had collected. This took Anton to a high-tech Swiss intelligence laboratory, the complete opposite of his own artistic workshop. As Anton analyzed the samples, he saw that the formula was a perfect copy. But then, he noticed an unfamiliar, foreign molecule, an impurity, but not a random impurity. It was like a specific chemical signature, a signature that only one other person from Facility 17 would use. His most brilliant but most ruthless student, Mikhail. Anton understood. Mikhail was alive, and he was selling the formula. This sent Anton on a global hunt with Dubois. He was no longer a perfumer, he was a hunter. He couldn't recognize Mikhail by his face, but he could by his scent. Intelligence led them to a luxury party in Monaco, a black market in Marrakech, and finally to a private laboratory hidden in the Alps. At every stop, Anton traced the chemicals Mikhail used, the perfumes he created. "He used lavender," he whispered at the party in Monaco. "But it's synthetic." Mikhail always hated natural things. In Marrakech, at a spice stall, he said, "Here, traces of ammonia. He's using it as a stabilizer, amateurish." Finally, they found him in a secluded villa in the Alps. The final confrontation was not a gunfight. It was a quiet, tense chess match. Mikhail was old and sick. In the last moments of his life, he was seeking a final crumb of power by selling the only thing he had ever created: death. This was the final showdown between 2 genius chemists, 2 old friends, 2 enemies. Anton didn't try to capture him. Instead, he presented him with a new perfume he had created himself. This scent was designed to remind them of their shared past, of those innocent days when they saw science as art, not as a weapon. When Mikhail inhaled the scent, tears streamed from his old eyes. And in a final moment of regret, he gave Anton the entire client list and the location of the main production facility. A few hours later, he succumbed to his own illness. Anton returned to his shop in Paris. The mission was over. He had buried the monster he had created with his own hands. On his table was a file from the Swiss government, stamped closed. He was truly free now. He reached for a bottle containing a new flower essence. This was the scent of life. And from now on, he would only create beautiful scents. The ghosts of the past had finally been silenced. Years passed. Anton grew old, his hands no longer as steady, but his nose still working like a genius, living a quiet life in his shop. But the waves he had created, without his knowledge, had continued to shape the world. Agent Dubois was now the respected director of his own division in Swiss intelligence. One day, he called a new, brilliant young agent to his side. Before them was a new biological threat case. "The answer," Dubois said, "is not in our computers." He took the young agent to the agency's most secure archive. There, in a glass case, stood a single, perfectly preserved orchid. Next to it was a small, leather-bound notebook. "This," Dubois said, "belonged to a man who was both a monster and a hero. His name was Anton, but his real name was Dmitri Volkov. The answer you're looking for is hidden in his philosophy. Read this." The notebook contained Anton's perfume formulas, but also his notes on chemical structures and his philosophy of creation versus destruction. Anton's legacy was training the new generation of agents. Around the same time, a United Nations bioweapons inspection team raided a secret laboratory in a rogue state. They found evidence that they were trying to recreate Tikaya Smirt. But the formula was flawed, ineffective. The team leader couldn't understand why until he found a small note next to his name on Mikhail's client list. Mikhail had sold the formula, yes, but to all but his most trusted buyers, he had sold a deliberately flawed, sabotaged version. Whether this was his last twisted act of professional pride or a sliver of repentance, no one would ever know. But Anton's influence had, in a way, corrected his darkest student even after his death. And in the final scene, we are in the greenhouse of Anton's old home outside Paris. The greenhouse is now managed by a foundation dedicated to botanical preservation. A young woman is carefully tending to the orchids. Dubois' young agent comes to visit her. She has a question about a specific molecular bond she read about in Anton's journal. The young woman in the greenhouse smiles. "He taught me that too," she says. "He used to say that the secret to neutralizing any compound is to understand its desire to be stable. You don't fight it. You give it what it wants." And in that moment it is understood. This young woman is the granddaughter of the writer Anton had unintentionally killed with his weapon decades ago. Anton had found her, secretly funded her education, and in his final years as a form of penance, had taught her not the knowledge of destruction, but the knowledge of creation, the art of botany and perfume. His legacy was complete.